Alrighty, good evening. It's Wednesday, June 8th, 2016. It is 5:32. It's the monthly meeting of the Urbana Human Relations Commission. Could we please have a roll call?
Frances Rydberg Baker,
Here.
Carol Bradford,
Here.
Stacy Burnett,
Here.
Samuel Bindum,
Here.
Daniel Larson,
Here.
Lisa Mosley,
Here.
Peter Resnick,
Here.
Aisha Lamb Sobe, and Catalina Thomas.
Here.
Thank you, Tony. Looking over tonight's agenda, are there any additions, edits, or corrections that need to be made? If not, is there a motion to approve?
I move that we approve.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Thank you. Also, looking over the minutes from our May 11th meeting, are there any additions, edits, or corrections that need to be made? If not, is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Thank you. Up next on our agenda is public participation. Seeing none, hearing none. And having no old business, we can jump right to new business. Alex, I believe there's a short presentation for us.
Yes, but before that, I just want to introduce our newest member to the Human Relations Commission,
Didn't know if we were doing that. in
Ms.
announcements.
Catalina Thomas. And we're very excited about Catalina joining us. She is currently the director of the food pantry for Wesley University Methodist Church. She came to us with extraordinary references. Previous to that, she was the executive director for the CASA of Vermilion County. And we're very excited that she has a Juris Doctorate from the University of Illinois Law School. And we are going to be very excited about that legal acumen being on the board and perhaps assisting us as we look at our ordinance. So I'm kind of excited. Please join me in welcoming Catalina Thomas.
Welcome. Thank you.
Welcome.
Sorry,
And-
Alex, I wasn't sure where we were going to do that.
Oh, no problem. In terms of the presentation, I wanted to do just a very minor presentation today and mostly invite you to thumb through this document, which has been emailed to you, and then do a little bit more of a robust conversation down the road. The state of Illinois has a department called the Department of Central Management Services, and one of the things they look at is procurement for the entire state. And it's my understanding that the governor commissioned a disparity study, a new one, be conducted for 2015, and it was conducted, and the report is out. And I wanted to kind of walk you through some of the important sections of the report. And it has something to do, of course, with the subject that this commission is deeply interested in, and also a similar process that we engage in when we look at procurement for the city and vendors and contractors that apply for EEO certification. And so the first thing I'd like to call your attention to is, let me see if I can scroll through this faster. Here in page 1, they outlined very nicely the study. The purpose was to perform a study of possible disparities in access to state prime contracting and associated subcontracting opportunities on contracts awarded during state fiscal years 2010 through 2011 on the basis of race and gender. And they explored whether minority-owned business enterprises, MBEs, and female-owned business enterprises, FBEs, collectively have equal access to state contracts, and if not, what remedies might be appropriate to redress the barriers that are created by race or gender discrimination. And they conducted the study, and I'll point you to their findings. So that was the purpose of the study. And in the findings, we're not surprised, in section B, overall, we found extensive evidence that discrimination on the basis of race and gender continues to operate in Illinois markets, and that disparities exist between the availability of minority-owned or female-owned business enterprises and how they're utilized on state contracts and associated subcontracts, as well as throughout the wider state economy. In our judgment, the report goes on to say, the state has a strong basis in evidence to continue its minority and female business enterprise programs and to employ narrowly tailored remedies to ameliorate the discrimination. For those of you that are much more interested in some of the details, you'll find some very comprehensive appendices that give you information on the various types of minority-owned businesses by demographic. And I'll point that out to you in a quick second. Let's see here. Oh, here they are. When you have an opportunity to look at bullet number 8, you will see the recommendations, and I kind of want to walk through some of those with you. Based on the findings of the study, they made the following recommendations. The first was to implement an electronic contracting data collection and monitoring system. Functionally, it should include contract compliance, full firm contract information, utilization plan capture, contract compliance, including verification of payments, contract goal setting, outreach tools, spend analysis of informal contracts, and P-cards, and you can read on for the rest of it. Number 2, lengthen the solicitation times. Longer windows to solicit and MFBE participation should increase the ability to meet the goals and reduce the barriers to minority female business enterprise submitting bids. Number 3, increasing access to state contracting information. The electronic management system described above is going to help to address the concerns raised in the interviews that it's difficult to obtain opportunities or information about which prime vendors might be interested in a project so that the MFBEs can market themselves and learn the opportunities of particular solicitations. 5, increase the outreach to MFBEs, which means increasing the focus on outreach and events hosted directly by the specific agency or university engaging in the procurement. 6, provide agency contracting forecasts, which would involve adopting the procurement best practice of providing annual or semi-annual agency contracting forecasts, whereby the agency projects approximately what it will spend at the general industry level or on specific projects. 7, review experience requirements, which would involve reviewing qualification requirements to ensure that MWBEs and small firms are not unfairly disadvantaged and that there is adequate competition for state work. Expanding small contractor bonding and financing programs. One of the things you'll see when minority or female-owned business enterprises are trying to contract for these larger projects, the procurement entity is going to ask for financing and bonding programs, and those minority firms are struggling to secure those. And there's tons of programs now available to try to provide streamlined methods for them to secure those. And the state went through and looked at what might be some recommendations in that area to eliminate it as a barrier. Moving on, coordinating the BEP program with the Small Business Set-Aside program. There was little awareness of the SBS program among BEP certified firms. They recommend that the two programs use the same industry codes, adopt the same standards, and consider annual gross receipts on the same basis. This will reduce the burdens on firms seeking to participate in both programs and confusion about which standards apply to individual contracts and firms. This one I found interesting. Create a cabinet-level position with overall responsibility for inclusion. To be fully effective, the commitment of the government of Illinois must be clear and enforceable. The BEP program should continue to be administered and overseen by CMS, but a cabinet-level position that reports directly to the governor will help to coordinate efforts across the state agencies and universities and develop statewide policies to implement best practices. Followed by a recommendation that to use the study to set the overall annual MFBE goals. The overall weighted availability of these business enterprises in all sectors combined was 12.8%. There are no qualitative data on the availability of PBEs, but we note that because disability is not a protected classification, precise estimates are not necessary. Continuing the current goal of 2% would be reasonable, according to the study. And then use the study to set MFBE contract goals. The University here of Illinois has been doing some outstanding work, and I've heard that the Champaign School District has been doing some significant goal setting in terms of utilization of minority and female business enterprises. Then we come to, and this is probably one of the most important things that anybody that engages in this type of work has to watch out for, and that is that any program that is developed has to be narrowly tailored eligibility standards. The case law has evolved significantly since the BE program was adopted 20 years ago. In addition to the social disadvantage that's suffered by virtue of membership in a minority group or being female, the courts require that the applicant owner also suffer economic disadvantage, defined by his or her personal net worth, that the firm be small, defined by the applicant's industry, and that it operate in the agency's market area. The state should therefore consider more narrowly tailoring the criteria for eligibility to participate in the program to meet these strict scrutiny tests. And on another day, Catalina could talk to us a little bit more about what the Constitution requires when it engages in strict scrutiny analysis. And a very simple understanding of it is that whenever there's a race-based intervention, the Supreme Court really requires that the goal setting be justified by statistical studies and analyses, and that whatever parameters are set, goals or otherwise, be very narrowly defined to remediate the disparity that has been discovered or statistically proven. And so it's one of the reasons that the city of Urbana does not have an MBE or an FBE program, and it's one of the reasons that we don't set goals because we haven't engaged in a disparity study. They're very expensive, and even if one is conducted, whatever program is designed then would have to meet very strict constitutional scrutiny, survive strict constitutional scrutiny in order to ensure that it is effective and not creating a disadvantage to other enterprises. And I'll let you go through the remaining page of recommendations, but I just wanted to sort of introduce you to what was the purpose of this report, what was the big finding that disparities continue to exist in the state of Illinois, and what were some of those salient recommendations that were given to the state to continue to close the gap. For those of you that really like data, you'll find at the very, there's one more part that I did want to, for Peter and for Aisha and for Catalina, and for all of you that are just interested in the law. Section 2 walks you through. Some of you have asked in the past about the legalities and the intricacies. And so here, Roman numeral 2 will give you the legal standards for state contracting affirmative action programs. What are the dangers? What are the 2 tests? And they spell it out right there. First, there has to be a compelling interest. And then second of all, whatever the solution that is developed has to be narrowly tailored to address that discrimination. And they walk through, after they've described the 2, they walk through and kind of introduce the ins and outs of the analysis and the Supreme Court case that brought it to the forefront. One thing that I think Lisa might find interesting is there's two cases that are presented that if you read about, the first is the city of Richmond, and then the second one is, I think, Chicago. That walks through some programs that were established and how they survived constitutional scrutiny and how they're going about improving accessibility to state procurement in contracting. As you know, we do this through, in part, we try to do this through our EEO process. And in the next throughout the summer, I want to work much more closely with you to upgrade our form. I did some outreach based on the last meeting in terms of two areas where applicants sometimes misunderstand, and that's question E. How does the company notify its recruitment sources of their commitment to equal employment opportunity? And the other is J. How does the company notify its subcontractors of its expectations that in regards to equal employment opportunity and the particular company's commitment to equal employment opportunity? And since we've been focusing a lot based on this commission's interest, we've been focusing a lot with the new applicants and the renewing applicants to affirmatively give us evidence of how are you notifying your recruitment sources and how are you notifying your subcontracting entities. And they're all starting to send letters to the unions affirming their interest, and they're also providing us copies of some of the letters that they're sending to their subcontractors, communicating to them what their expectations are with respect to EEO. As we go through expanding our form, there's a lot of questions that are important that we're not necessarily asking, such as how long has your company been in business? We have some companies that have been in business a very long time, and their numbers are full utilization of the American workforce are quite low. So those are some of the things. There's some attestations, additional attestations, promises that they make that are not being made through our current form. And so through the summer, as we collaborate, there's going to be an opportunity to improve how we're assessing some of these companies that are applying for Urbana Certificate of Compliance. On that note, I did want to mention that I am extremely excited that the City of Champaign has hired a new human relations officer. They call their officer the CRM, Community Relations Manager, and her name is Rachel Joy, and she's come on board, I think, a week ago. I've had the privilege of taking her out to lunch and extending friendship and collegiality, and she's reciprocated. We've also had the opportunity to collaborate on two committees that Tony and I serve on, which is the Martin Luther King Steering Committee and the International Humanitarian Awards Steering Committee, and we had a very productive dialogue and collaboration there. And I mentioned to her now in that one of the things that she's very interested in is the EEO process. And so I look forward to collaborating with her on their processes and where appropriate, sharing best practice. And so I think we're going to have a wonderful partner in Rachel Joy, as well as the work that the Human Relations Commission does in Champaign. So if I'd like to invite you to read the portions of the, at least the executive summary of this report, and then towards the very end, you're going to see, and I think Samuel will like this piece of the report, you'll see all the data, the appendices that talk about the various demographic groups, what percentages they comprise of the firms, and how much of the procurement they're receiving, state procurement. And so I'd like to invite you to read at least the executive summary, read those parts that you find naturally interesting to the focus that you bring to the commission, and to email me any questions that you have so that I can put together a training session so that we can go through some of these items. I think that there are some practices here that can inform the work that we do at the municipal level. If there are any questions now, I can write them down and include them, or you can just email me.
Peter?
Actually, a quick one by way of research. You said that one of the problems with doing the MAFB program here is that it requires doing a study to figure out what the disparity is. We collect an awful lot of data for the city compliance reports. I'd be curious whether city legal would be comfortable with maybe having our IT department just, or maybe, you know, you two, if you've got enough in the Excel spreadsheets over the years, to collect that together, do some trends. Would that be enough to support an application for a MAFB program?
Excellent point. We've already begun in the HRO office designing some reports that, you know, all the work is at the front, you know, designing the report and recoding the data so that we can pull it quickly and generate the report. So that's already underway. In terms of the disparity study, shortly after coming on board, I did a little bit of research on what that would cost and what seems to be the standards and the requirements that the Supreme Court has set by virtue of their case law. And so there's a couple of firms. Usually they're done at a very large level, at a county level or a state level. IDOT does one, and so IDOT has one of the leading disadvantaged business enterprise programs. Some larger cities will do them, like Chicago. The preliminary research I did was saying that you don't have to use a particular firm, but it has to be compliant with a particular methodology. And I got excited about that because I thought with the university in our back door, with our expertise here, we might be able to develop something that is compliant. One of the things, when I scheduled a informal session with one of the big firms that does these disparity studies, and I think, if memory serves me right, they could run into like $200,000 in that neighborhood. And one of the things they mentioned, you know, they weren't going to give me that much time as a free call, but one of the things they mentioned is that sometimes what they have found is when they're invited to come into an organization, they will charge $40,000 to look at all of their data and to tell them where their data is bad and what they need to do to fix their data collection, add more fields and this and that, so that they can come back a year or two later, and then now they have the data that they can generate the disparity study. And so if we try to do it ourselves, which, you know, I think that would be a great idea, we might spend a year, and you know from the traffic stop data, that took a year. We might spend a year just looking at, do we have all the data points? Are we collecting all the data points? So then we can engage in our analysis further down. But with your request, I'll pursue that a little bit further about what it might look like for us to actively do it. And if we can get it down, we might be able to invite others.
And yeah, I think that's a good idea. I know the university obviously did a study. I don't know on what scale, whether it was Champaign-Urbana, whether it was statewide, and whether we could hook on to some of their stuff. I have a concern that, of course, they're charging this amount both because of the size of the organizations that they're dealing with, but also because they can. And the risk to some municipality of doing it wrong and then ending up on the bad end of a lawsuit is obviously high. We're a smaller community, our risk profile may be smaller, and therefore it may be reasonable for us to take a little more risk and try and attempt it on our own. So it might be at least worth a review with city legal to see if they're willing to. I'll say, just by way of comment, we had this discussion when the cities were engaging with the UCDB project about setting up MAFB, and the university used their program to do it. One of the concerns with MAFB is always this is about the ownership of the organizations and not the workers. Both are important things. They're both interesting. I think as a commission, we've always sort of concentrated on the workforce, making sure that people are employed. at a fair rate. Having ownership is obviously a great thing, but the impact is lower because it's individuals involved who own a particular company and not necessarily the bigger companies that are employing lots of people. So I think we do also have to weigh the impact to the community of engaging in such a program.
And I just want to make sure that I'm clear. I just want you to know what's the latest study is and what it's saying. I'm not, there is interest among some members of the city council of Champaign-Urbana having a minority and female disadvantaged business enterprise program. Because I get those calls. And I also get them for minority business owners. And so today I'm more interested in giving you the data and seeing what that looks like, and so you can see how the state is engaging in activities that are in the same line of some of the activities we engage in. But I just want to make sure, Peter, that I'm not advocating or not advocating for MBE programs, just giving you the state of the land.
Understood.
Great, thank you. I believe then our next item on the agenda is our staff report. Where would you like to begin, Alex?
All right, the first company that we have is Henneman Engineering. And you'll see it's a medium-sized company, 74 employees. And their minority workforce utilization is 9.5. Their female utilization is 27%. And we recommended 1 year certification for them. Any questions on that? Reliable Plumbing and Heating, small company, 36 employees, female utilization of 2.8, minority utilization of 0. Given that this is their first time that they're applying, we recommend certifying in 6 months and seeing where they are 6 months from now.
Sorry.
Now, this is a company that in their first submission, they did not provide us evidence on item J, which is notification to the labor unions. And so we reached out to them promptly, and they supplemented their application, and you'll see at the very end, they wrote a letter to the plumbers and pipe fitters local, as well as the sheet metal workers local, reasserting what their expectations are with respect to recruitment. Backing up a little bit, back to Henneman, we also, when they first submitted, turned around and requested additional information and asked them to provide a little bit of a better overview of their recruitment efforts, as well as their numbers, so they hadn't completed the table correctly. And so we got better information in the second email. With respect to Royal Mechanical Services, a small company, 44 employees, they have a female participation rate of 18.2, and they have a minority participation rate of 2.3. Given that they're a new company and they're out of, not, at least not at the 0 level, we recommended 1 year. The commission felt less. We're open to that. I did issue a request for clarification after we received their application. In fact, I issued 2 requests for clarification. What you'll see is at the very end of their second page Have all recruitment sources been notified? And they indicated that they have, and that all ads provide equal employment opportunity statements, which was important. And then in section 3, you'll see a notation. I asked them, since they're new and their numbers is utilization is at 2%, I asked them for last year's data as well to see what kind of growth there is. And they reported that their data for last year was equal to what it is for this year. So they haven't had a lot of turnover and therefore haven't had a lot of opportunity to recruit. And that led to recommending to you 1 year. But as I said, we're open to.
So 2 questions on the new folks. First of all, Reliable sounds very familiar. Have we not had a contract with them before?
That's Reliable Mechanical versus who we have here, which is Reliable
Reliable
Plumbing.
and Heating.
Aren't they
And
the same?
Are they 2 separate companies, or, yeah, are they 2 pieces of the same company?
In their declaration on their first page, they listed themselves as both the company and the parent company. So,
Okay. The other question I had for Henneman,
oh, and Tony just did. Tony's got a detailed mind trap for. He says that he recalls the address for Reliable Mechanical, and it is different from this address.
excellent, okay. For Henneman, what is their business, what is the contract for? It was not listed on the top of the page.
You know that I can't answer for you today. What was the first question?
What their business is, what do they do, and what are they contracting for?
I'm not sure as to the second question, and that might be something that we'll amend in the process. We don't normally require them to submit what particular contract they're bidding on. And now we're in one thing that's happened that's new that I think is good is they're starting to independently certify with us, not necessarily as part of a bid, but to get general certification. And so we might be seeing more and more applications that aren't tied to a specific bid. They're an engineering services firm, and I'll see if I can pull them up really quickly on the
The
website.
reason I ask is, obviously, their numbers are not great. They have a bunch of people listed as technicians, as professionals, and I'm wondering what that means. Are we talking about, particular specialists that they've got, that their workforce is going to be kind of odd to begin with, or what exactly are we dealing with here? It's a nice thing to know because it gives us some direction on expectations.
Yes, it's an engineering services consulting firm. I could issue a request for additional information. What information do you think? Let's see here. I'll just read you a piece of their bio. They're 55 years in operation, so this is one of those older firms. They, according to their bio, transformed from a small group of engineers to a firm with nearly. I want to make sure I've got the right company. Perhaps it'd be better if I just made sure I'm clear on the question and reached out to them and got additional information. The particular question that's in your mind is.
What is the nature of the work that they do, and from where are they getting their workforce? Is it a company full of PhDs, for instance? Or do they have a range of labor jobs?
I can go back and get that information. conscious of whether, I'm not sure whether they're applying for a. I'm not conscious today of whether they're applying for a contract right now or whether it's generalized. A 9.5 utilization is not the worst. So I was wondering if the commission was inclined to certify them probationarily for 6 months or the year, and then, and with the request for information that I would do regardless. I'm a little nervous about, we could hold them over, but I don't know.
And if they've got a contract ready, and there was no staff recommendation to give them 2 years and a clean bill of health, so we're you know,
Nobody's getting that.
Right.
And that's appropriate
yeah.
for this group. Yeah.
So let me speak a little to the next one, and then we can do the motion and have a discussion. The next first-time applying company is Weatherproofing Technol, and it is a female workforce utilization this year of 14.8 and a minority workforce utilization of 13.3, which is pretty good. We're recommending certification for 1 year.
And why do they have old numbers if they're new? Or they gave us old numbers, but they never had a contract before?
So this is a company that we detected that when they first applied, and I issued a request for evidence. And we had to clarify with them that when they submit bids, they'll usually fill out this application and attach it to the bid. But if they're not selected for a bid, then we never see that application. So I made sure that they understood you actually never applied with us. You submitted these numbers as part of your bid, and it was not forwarded. This one was forwarded to us, so therefore you might be in a very good situation in your bid status. I said, now, since you did take the time to submit it, 14, go ahead and send me that data. And so they sent the data in, and so that's why we gave it to you so that you could compare where they are at this year versus in 14. We also requested notification of how they notify their workforce, and they indicated that the change was that previously they had assumed that the question only related in terms of the use of subcontractors to weatherproofing. And when the new person, the EEO person at Tremco, reviewed the application, they said, no, we do use labor at the parent level, which is Tremco level. And so that's why they issued the clarification to us, letting us know that they do utilize them and giving us those numbers. They are not able to disaggregate the data to weatherproofing, and so what we have is the aggregated data for the company. That concludes the first-time applicants.
Is there a motion?
I move that we accept Alex's recommendations for these newly applying companies, namely Henneman Engineering for 1 year, O'Brien Imports 1 year, Reliable Plumbing and Heating 6 months, Royal Mechanical Services Incorporated 1 year, and Weatherproofing Technology 1 year.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion.
So I've got 2 questions on this. Because we have the old numbers for weatherproofing, they actually look like they've made some progress recently. The number of women employees has not gone up nearly as much as their overall hires over the years, but they've had a great increase in African American population, bigger than their numbers for hiring. They've had a good increase in Latino population, bigger than their numbers for hiring, and a huge increase proportionally of Asian population. I wouldn't object to a 2-year recommendation for weatherproofing, since they seem to be going in the right direction in any event. And I don't know how much a letter from Alex and gathering more information is actually going to get us. For Henneman, my concern is that their overall statistic is 9.5%, and their female population is pretty good compared to many that we see. But their African American population is 0. And their Latino population is 2. They've got a bigger number than you'd think because they've got a higher Asian population. And that's of concern to me. And I wouldn't mind seeing that one be 6 months. I have no particular objection to the motion as it is, but if there are others around the table who would be willing to make those 2 changes, I would certainly support it.
Feedback, thoughts?
I would say that I don't think I'd go along with the weatherproofing at 2 years. I like that we are kind of holding that as the really, a real vote of approval, really your stellar, this is what we want everyone to be like kind of idea. And with the rate of women, for example, it's certainly not anywhere near that. And so I think 1 year is appropriate. As far as lowering Henneman, that I would be more open to that. But I don't think we should go up to 2 for weatherproof.
So I'll start with a friendly amendment to make Henneman 6 months, if both you and the seconder would agree.
I agree. My only comment is I want to just tie back to something you said earlier, and I've been thinking this since I rejoined the commission. Sometimes I withhold comment because one of the things in the back of my mind is if we have access to data that shows us how many or a percentage of individuals of different races, ethnicities, and genders work in these different areas. For example, when I think about engineering, it's mostly white males. It just is. And so, given the area we live in, do we have access to data, either through census or some other avenue that tells us for Champaign County or our community, what percentage of our workforce is what it's made up of and what areas? I don't know. I struggle with whether to give them 6 months or a year or 2 years when their numbers are really low. If the reality is within that specific field, are there minorities or women or for them to even pull from? You can do all the reaching out you want to, but if those people don't exist, especially because we're not a big city, they're not there. So that's something that I'm struggling with. I just wanted to share that with the group. I'm flexible with how much time we give them or not, because that's one of the things that's kind of always there for me. It's when you look at areas of study, even at the university, and where you see the majority of folks going. Obviously, there are black engineers, there are Latino engineers, there are female engineers, but are they here? And do the companies, if they're doing due diligence and the folks just aren't there, I'm fine with granting them the full year or 2 years. So it makes it a little bit difficult. So I'm flexible. I just wanted to share that. I don't have we got to do this type of attitude about it, because I feel like I'm kind of making decisions and I'm kind of trying to look at the full picture and make sure it's as accurate as possible. But I think if they show the efforts sending out the letters, I really like that they are sending letters to unions now, and they're showing how they're doing recruitment and where they're pulling people from. So I just wanted to share that
Peter?
I absolutely agree with everything you said, Carol. And I think one of the things that we go through, especially when we get to the point of looking at someone and saying we're not going to certify them, is are they making a good faith effort to do it? And by making it either 6 months or 1 year, my opinion is what we're doing is saying this is the urgency with which we want to hear from you about these numbers. And if they come back to us, and I think we should put the responsibility on them to say, we are doing everything we can to be out there and recruiting, and we have a population because of the people we're hiring, because of the skill sets we need, that is predominantly white, predominantly male, whatever it is. And if they come back and say that, I think we take them, we review that information and say, yep, for this case, even though your numbers are terrible, you are making maybe an over and above effort to change those numbers, even in the face of the pool you're recruiting from, and therefore we'd give you 2 years with bad numbers if you're doing a really good job. So I agree with you completely. My only point in making it 6 months for this one is I don't think we want to wait. I don't think we need to wait. But I do think we want Alex to be, on Henneman more than maybe some others to say, okay, we're going to let you go for now, but we do want to hear in pretty short order, what are your recruiting tools and how are you making that effort? So I think we're in violent agreement.
Oh, yeah.
So, there's two ways to go about it. One of the things I wanted to make sure that you all understand is your power to certify, but I monitor after certification. So if you wanted to certify them for a year, but that you wanted to impose that they need to file a new workforce data report in 6 months, you have the power to do that, and I would enforce it, and I would make sure that and I would notify you. That's one way. Another way, of course, is to do what you're suggesting, which does get their attention. When the commission issues a 6-month certification, they call me like, oh, and you have to fill out a whole new form, and you have to give the fresh data in 6 months. But then, if they don't, sometimes if the commission is, sometimes it's easier to certify for the year, impose the requirement that they submit new data in 6 months. And so I think clearly for reliable, I think the right way to go is 6 months. With Henneman, that is not at 0, they're at 9.5. You might do a year. I'm open to 6 months too, but you might do a year, but with that additional requirement. And I just want to make sure you have that as an option.
Yeah, I like that. I think that the point of 1 year is partly educational and to give people an idea of what we think a company's employment profile should look like ideally. So they have something to strive for. So they don't look at 27% women and think we're doing great. And there are so many women coming out of the engineering department here, for example, and they might not be looking for jobs there, but it seems like an attractive company for an engineer to work at, that they might be trying just a little bit harder to get that up and not be complacent about it. So I think 1 year may be sort of just the right thing, especially for a first time. You don't have to, unless it's really falling down. I don't think a 6 month is necessary. The 1 year is good.
I'm happy to withdraw my amendment, and I'll, especially if Alex is willing to get with them and say, we'd like to hear about the progress you're making sooner rather than later. I think that's sufficient.
Any additional questions, comments regarding these new applicants?
I just want to make one more comment. I don't want to drag it out, but I do want to say I like when we have discussions that clarify whether it's a small company or a branch or division of a larger company that does sit in a metropolitan area. Because again, if I'm looking at numbers and I know you're in Chicago or New York or Atlanta, I expect to see a little bit more diversity. We may not actually see it when they're working on a project here because of they're using local, if they're using local folks, or are they bringing people in from outside the area. But I do think we need to as part of the conversation, look at the size, where they're located at, are they a subsidiary or division of a larger company that would have access to a larger pool of diverse applicants. And, whether we do 6 months or a year, sometimes I wonder with 6 months, especially with these types of jobs they're bidding on, is that enough time for them to make changes? If we are just asking to see efforts, that's different, but will their workforce really change in 6 months? Probably not. So, like I said, the amount of time is not as much an issue for me as it is just having a little bit more information to make those kinds of decisions.
Can I respond? So, one of the, I really like that you guys really get the balance between good faith efforts and progress in terms of statistical utilization. And sometimes when we do give I think that I'm at the 90th percent of really comfort with the decisions that the commission makes. Like you're analyzing all these factors, and what you're giving in terms of time generally always feels right on the money. And sometimes with this, when 6 months is given, Carol, you're right, they're not going to be able to necessarily change the statistical demographic, but it does change the level of investment that they make in job fair participation, scheduling of meeting. I had one employer, after you asked me to issue a request for information, literally made an appointment with the union to discuss what is going on with recruitment. And so, whereas you're right, Carol, sometimes it isn't going to change that, it is going to change and motivate selective identification of where they're going to invest and what they're going to participate in. And just yesterday, I issued a request for information for one of the companies that's before you today, and the gentleman kept me on the phone for 45 minutes, and I had it scheduled for 15 minutes. I was going into stress. And but he had tons of questions about how they could do a better job. And one of the things I said to them is, we're not a consulting firm, so I really can't provide you. We are committed to customer service in the Human Relations Office and technical assistance. We have regulations. We ought to help companies understand how they can do better. One of the things I pointed them was to our toolbox that I mentioned to you that we've created for employers and for vendors. And so they walked it through the phone call, and they're going to be utilizing some of those tools. And so when you do request 6 months, I'm finding a lot of motivation. And in 3 instances, higher level meetings were held between the HR office and the executive office, because now the executive office, it hit their radar, and now the HR department called me and said, thank you, we've been trying to get their attention, but your commission got their attention for us, and now we're having a dialogue. And I thought, oh, great, good to hear that. So I'm glad that I'm in agreement with what you're...
Stacy, you have a question?
Yes. Being new on the board and looking at the data, I was wondering, I work for an engineering company, and I was just wondering how much of this data reflects companies that outsource for temp agencies. Just looking at my company, I know we have a lot of temporary services that do work for us, and even though that group is minorities, the actual people who work for the company are not. So would this data reflect that?
I don't even think we collect that.
We do not. I've never seen it.
So they may be using good faith and doing more. Right. But it's not reported. I see your point.
Can you clarify that just for me a little bit more?
For temporary temp agencies,
Mhm.
companies outsource employment with temporary services, so those individuals could be minority.
Mm-hmm.
But so is this data that we have here that they submit, is that reflecting for the temporary services and the employees that actually work for the company, or is it just for the company?
You know, that's a great question, and I'm making a note because that might be something that we add to the newly designed form. My impression is going to be that it's probably not. I think these are snapshots of their payroll system, and I think that those temporary services are issuing invoices, and so that might go through their accounting system versus their payroll system, but I can clarify that. One of the things that I've noticed, there was one particular company that I looked at and I thought, wow, they're a big company. They're like 70 people. And then I looked at the distribution. I thought, yeah, but of that 70, 60 are unionized labor, which leaves 10. And of that 10, they had some good representation. And so the company has a lot of control over the 10 that they outright hire, not so much control over the 60 that they rely on the unions for. And so I'm thinking in the future, if I can program our system to produce a report that tells you out of the non-unionized labor force what that number is, and then out of the unionized labor force what that number is. But I'm not sure if that's going to be a big burden on the applicants in terms of splicing their data differently. So that's something I'd want to call a couple of applicants and ask them, would this be burdensome to you? And if so, how? Or if we required it, how would it impact you? So that we're engaging in knowledgeable modification of our process. So did I answer your question? Okay.
I just had another question about rural mechanical services regarding the utilization. Could you repeat the utilization? Rural mechanical services?
For women, it is 18.2%, and for minority, it is 2.3%. And remember, women is not included in the minority. So women is a separate number. So the 2.3 is turning out to be they have one Latino employee, which gives them the 2.3.
Okay.
And there are 44 employees.
And so looking at their location in Peoria, and what you had mentioned previously about getting additional documentation 6 months later to see what their progression may be, is something that I think we should consider
For
rural mechanical.
Okay, I'm fine with that. And you know, thank you for calling our attention to that particular applicant, because as I look at their section 3, which is the distribution of their workforce, this is one that describes the case I was mentioning to you. So they have unionized labor, and it appears that perhaps they're a company of 44, and it appears that 25 of their employees, almost half, are probably unionized, they're technicians, which leaves the remainder of,
10 employees.
yeah, which is their office staff. And so what we would do in that case is issue a request for additional information 6 months from now on new demographics and what their recruitment efforts have looked like over the last 6 months. But notice that this is the company that I brought to your attention, that their statistics are the same this year as they were last year, so they haven't had a lot of turnover. So whereas Carol mentioned earlier, they're probably not going to have a statistical change in 6 months, they might have improved good faith efforts that they can report out. So if someone will amend the motion to include the request for, I can do it.
I think that's a friendly amendment from you.
Yes, I would like to make a friendly amendment for rural mechanical services for a year, but following up with additional information on hiring practices and a snapshot of employee demographics in 6 months.
I think you have to accept.
I accept.
Any final discussion? Questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, the same. All right, renewals.
All right, for our renewing companies, we have Koning Body and Equipment, a small company, 23 employees. They grew by 1 employee since the last time they applied. Their female utilization is 17.4, and their minority utilization is 4.3. They were previously certified for 6 months, and this is a great example we were talking about earlier, Carol, where they made an improvement in that 6 months. They were at 0 minority utilization, and now they're at 4.3. We're recommending certification for 1 year. And after receiving the application, I was unclear by how they answered statement G, which is, has the contractor notified all of its subcontractors? And we got into a question about this at the last meeting with respect to another applicant, and after calling them, they indicated that they answered an A only because they do not utilize subcontractors. And so there is a clarification there. Otherwise, they are compliant with that practice. Any questions on that one? Okay. Next is Michaels, a very large company. They have experienced a reduction in force. They were of 847 employees. Their female utilization went down dramatically. They were at 6.8, and now they're at 0.8. And their minority utilization went up slightly. It was at 8.6 last year. I'm sorry, yeah. And now they're at 8.7. We previously certified them for 6 months. They did not renew, obviously, during that 6-month period. They renewed a year later. And we're recommending 1 year certification for the company. When they, oh, okay, I remember this company. When they, you certified them last time, actually, they did apply within the 6 months. I apologize. I remember speaking to this employer, and I advised them that if they intend to be recertified, they really need to send us very comprehensive data on what they've been doing to recruit, and they did. You'll see in the packet that they list out some of the efforts that they're engaging in, and they even sent us proof that they had surfaced minority candidates and gave us their resumes. We did not disclose that to you because we don't, some of those are confidential items. But they did surface them and evaluate, and they did experience an increase. So given that, I thought 1 year would be something that the commission would be comfortable with and that the HRO office would be comfortable with. Any questions?
So what caused the drastic, I'm sorry, what caused the drastic change of employees?
You mean in the female category?
Well, the overall,
You mean the reduction?
yes.
Oh, I don't generally inquire into what led to their reduction in force. It's something I could begin to look into a little bit more, but I didn't inquire.
It just seems the number for women decreased.
Yeah, it looks like in general, some of their minority position has fallen greater than the overall decline, especially women, and especially Native Americans and African Americans, which I find rather problematic, and I'm not, that's the one in this list that I would like to talk about during the discussion.
Okay, moving on to Owens. And Owens is a small company. Their female utilization is at, experienced a decline at 8.7, and their minority utilization is at 0. This is an application that when we received, I immediately reached out to them and asked them to submit evidence of how they are communicating their expectations to their recruitment sources. And you'll see in the packet that they sent us a copy of the letter on the second supplemental submission, what their policy is and who they transmitted it to. And they transmitted it to, the spreadsheet will show you, I think 10 unions and their addresses. And you have that in the packet. This is one where by virtue of their size, small, we would normally certify them for 2 years. I felt a little uncomfortable given their 0% utilization doing that, and I decided to respectfully recommend to you that you consider certifying them for 1 year and looking at what their demographics look like at that point and reevaluating their good faith efforts. The next company that is renewing is renewing. The last time we interacted with them, I think, is in 2011, and it's GM Sipes Construction. They are a very small company. Their female utilization is 15.0, and their minority utilization is 20.0. And given their size and actually given their achievement, they were previously certified for 2 years, and we would recommend certifying them for 2 years. Incidentally, it was a pleasure speaking. This is the company that I mentioned. We spoke for almost 45 minutes. They were even with those numbers, that some good achievement, they're very interested in figuring out how they could do things better. And so we had a conversation about that. The next company is Vizu Sewer of Missouri. And this is a company that is a small company as well. They have a female utilization of increase from 5.9 to 9.1, and a minority utilization that had a dramatic increase from 5.9 to 15.2. They were previously certified for 6 months, and we are requesting that they be recertified for 1 year. This is a company also that as soon as we received their application, we reached out and asked them to prove that they had notified their labor recruitment sources of their expectations and obligations on EEO, and they submitted evidence. They sent notification to the National Production Workers Union, Local 707, and gave them their entire EEO standard. Last but not least, Vermeer Sales and Service. And Peter asked that we request asked that this application be deferred last time to this time, and that we reach out to them with clarification. And this is the one where Aisha also had some questions about why they answered NA on question E. Have you notified your recruitment sources? And then also a question on notification of contractors. I reached out to them and interviewed them and asked them to submit some supplemental information. And during our conversation, they indicated they completely misunderstood the question on E. They do notify their recruitment sources of their EEO expectations, and they also place on their advertisements that they are an EEO employer, and they indicated that the only reason they had answered NA on their subcontractors is because they do not utilize subcontractors. So, but if they were to utilize them, they would notify, and so they changed their answers to yes. And you'll see that some of their recruitment comes from their corporate headquarters, and so they issue notifications clarifying with their corporate headquarters their EEO obligations. You'll also see at the very end of this application a letter from the city arborist, Michael Brunk, that details why this particular, he's very sensitive to working with companies that meet their EEO obligations. He's very committed to that. He wanted to bring to our attention that one of the reasons he's particularly interested in purchasing from this company is because I understand that our recycling program is extremely heavily used, and it's a public one, and so there's some safety issues if anything were to come out of this powerful grinder. And so this particular company has some kind of patented hood that ensures that nothing come out of it and hurt anyone. And so you'll see a very detailed letter there about why this particular vendor is one that it would be important for the city to work with for ensuring the safety of the public and the safety of their operations of the recycling center. And so we having reviewed all of their most recent submission, we recommend 1-year certification. However, because they're at 0, and their turnover has been very low as well. But if the commission were interested in doing 1 year with additional good faith and a snapshot at 6 months, we could do that, or you could amend to 6 months and just do an outright recertification there.
Peter?
Do you know diversityworking.com, which is the recruitment tool they mentioned that they use? Is this a widely used one, something that we can take as a good faith effort?
I'm uncomfortable commenting on the quality of the, it didn't raise any flags for me when I looked at it. It didn't raise any flags when I looked at it. I think that I get the sense that they realize that we are looking at these carefully, and I think that it's my hope that in 6 months they'll produce evidence of their good faith efforts. They don't advertise in newspapers, really. They don't. They draw most of their applicant flow from their corporate website. They do have their policy out there, and then this particular job board. We could ask. We could ask for at the time at the 6 month mark when we look. We could ask if I have questions. I'm going to call them and ask them. Have you considered alternative advertisements? Have you considered this or that? And then, if I feel uncomfortable, then I would represent this company to you for amending their certification, and I would also report back to you at the 6 month mark.
So, I'd like to make a motion. What you will hear missing is purposeful. To approve Koenig Body and Equipment for 1 year, Owens Excavating and Trucking for 1 year, GM Spies Construction for 2 years, Visu Sewer of Missouri for 1 year, and Vermeer Sales and Service for 1 year with the 6 month stipulation that we get a little more information from them.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Any additional discussion, comments, or questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same?
And
Thank you.
You will note that I did not include in that motion, is it Michael's or Michelle's? Or I think the thing that needs to be collected from them, they showed 0 hiring in their turnover numbers. They showed lots of people separated, but no new hires. Yet down in their supporting materials, they said they went to a job fair. What are they going? If everybody is being fired because of some layoff problem, that's one thing, and we might take that into consideration. But if they're showing up for a job fair, I think we need more information from these folks before we approve them for anything.
Any thoughts, If not, okay. So is there a motion?
I don't think we need one. I think
No?
Alex has heard the message that these folks aren't getting approved with the information
Okay.
they've provided.
I'm sorry, yeah. Is it okay for them, we'll table that until more information arrives?
Yeah, that fast.
Yeah. Everything else was approved with your recommendations.
Where are we on the agenda?
All right, the activity report?
I apologize. I had a technical glitch with the report, and I'm also improving it a little bit. So it will be available for you next Wednesday, and if you will just kindly go online and look at it, and if you have any questions, feedback to me, I would greatly appreciate it. I almost pulled an all-nighter, but I couldn't do it. At 44, I can't do it anymore, so I apologize. While I do, I'll let Tony do the budget report, and then I wanted to chat about 2 items.
Okay, I just have one new item for you on the budget report this month, and that was the purchase of the books that you have before you. But the total expenditure was $141.39, which leaves us $58.61 in the books commission budget line item.
Thank you, Tony. Alex, you have a couple of announcements?
Yes, please. The first is we're approaching the end of the fiscal year, and we have some money. And so I wanted to find out if you would authorize me to purchase a Human Relations Commission tablecloth. So when we go out on the road representing the commission, that it's something professional, and perhaps a couple of stands for literature, something clear that we can put the literature on. I didn't have any time to price what they might look like, but as long as it's not over $1,000 total, if you would authorize us to do that, I would greatly appreciate that. That's item 1. And then item 2, I wanted to update you a little bit on the Urbana Traffic Stop Data Task Force. So the first item is that as you may know, the Champaign County Board created a racial justice task force, and I believe that Samuel is the chair of that task force. Am I correct?
That is correct.
Okay, yes. And so the Urbana Human Relations Commission is doing good work. And Samuel has called and asked us to participate in doing a presentation to the Racial Justice Task Force on the Urbana Traffic Stop study. And so Peter Resnick and I are going to be going over and giving them an overview of it. And so we're very excited to do that. Also, related to the traffic stop data, the City Council asked for a little bit of context for where we are. And so I wanted to provide you a little bit of context on where we are. And so just bear with me for 3 minutes. I wanted to bring to your attention that November of 2015, the Urbana Traffic Stop Task Force completed its work and submitted a final report to the City Council for them to review and to consider. That was in November. In December 7, only 30 days later, the City Council heard a presentation from the task force chair, Mr. Peter Resnick, and took in his overview of the report and began to study it. About 2 weeks later, December 14th, the City Council passed a resolution accepting the final report of the task force into their records for study. About a month later, on January 25th, the City Council received a report from the Human Relations Office, my office, on marijuana, what the arrest data for Urbana looked like with respect to marijuana. There was a ACLU report that talked about marijuana, and sometimes it's when you see national data, one wonders, is this representative of our local data? And so I prepared that and submitted it to them, and I've given a copy to you as well. And sure enough, it was similar trending. A couple of months later, about 2 months later, on March 14th, the City Council received a spreadsheet. They wanted to consider the recommendations contained in the final report and begin to review and prioritize them. And so we prepared a tool that they could use to begin the prioritization process. 2 weeks later, the City Council received a report from Chief Connolly that gave his perspective on the data, especially on cannabis enforcement. And then 2 weeks after that, about a month after that, on April 22nd, the City Council received a report of a survey that they asked to be conducted of the mindset among the council of which were the important recommendations that should be implemented because of high relevancy and high essentialness. And so I generated a survey, collected it, and then reported the data back to them. Shortly thereafter, the city council took a bold move, and they moved to amend the ordinance on cannabis violations, and they reduced the minimum fine for possession of cannabis from $300 to $50. And then, that was on April 4th, I believe. And then on May 15th, the city council moved to amend how the settlement of violations prior to a suit being filed. There was a concern about whether when fines are levied, whether people that did not have the means to pay those fines within 14 days, what impact that had. And in part that came from one of the recommendations of the report that spoke about the impact on certain communities of heavy fining. And so the city council moved to increase the time to pay fines from 14 days to 60 days. And so that is now law in Urbana. Also on May 16th, the city council passed an ordinance amending the possession of cannabis paraphernalia and its penalty. The fine for cannabis paraphernalia possession was reduced from $300 to $25. And that was to keep in line with the reduction of the actual possession to $50. So then the possession of just equipment or paraphernalia would be $25. And currently, the city council had a brief dialogue. One of the things that came out of the report was a request for a general look at the entire fining schedule for violations of Urbana ordinances. And so there was a general discussion at that particular session of the council on what that might look like, a review. And so that may happen at some point in the near future. And that sort of gives you a context of where the city council is. I appeared before the city council recently, and I mentioned to them that they have a lot to do. They handle zoning issues, they handle tax levying. I'm amazed how many issues they handle. And I said to them that the Human Relations Commission is quite sophisticated, quite capable of really doing some of the heavy lifting, some of the things they can't do by virtue of their time. There are studies that we can engage in and can produce out of this commission concrete, detailed recommendations and for them to consider implementation of. And this is not unusual. Many times planning commissions and zoning commissions do some of that heavy lifting and then transmit their recommendations and findings for council approval. I was hoping they would be favorable and had my fingers crossed, and they were extremely excited about the opportunity of this commission using its expertise to engage in some of that studying and heavy lifting and transmitting of recommendations. And one of the recommendations that some people thought was really controversial and really out there was the recommendation in the report that automobile insurance be looked at in terms of can it be made more affordable for those that cannot afford it. And that had some head scratching and eyebrow lifting, like, you know. And so after they communicated they'd be comfortable with this body, and not just this body, but the Civilian Police Review Board, there's some pieces of the task force report that the Civilian Police Review Board would be very well equipped to look at. And so at some point I'm going to have conversations with you a little bit further, which piece is really in this jurisdiction and then which piece is more in the Civilian Police Review Board. It appears that operations would be more CPRB, but disparity analysis and recommendation sort of analysis would be this body. And so once they communicated the favorability, I actually I spent 1 hour, because I have, I didn't want to get sucked into that research. I spent 1 hour and wondered, is there anybody doing anything around affordability of auto insurance? I about fell out of my chair. California is doing some amazing work on making automobile insurance affordable for certain demographics. And it appears to be a very robust program. I saw that New Jersey is doing some, I believe, age-based over a certain age. And Hawaii is doing some work around that. And Hawaii, I wasn't very clear on. I had exceeded my hour. In that hour, though, I called, just on a whim, the insurance commissioner's office of California. And I got one of the assistants to the commissioner, not a clerical, but like a deputy person. And he was walking by the phone when it rang, and the receptionist was out, and he picked up the phone. And I said, "Oh, you're going to hate me because I'm not going to let you go." And I said, "Can you explain to me in 5 minutes your program and what was involved in getting it launched and whether it's working for you and et cetera, et cetera." And he was in a good mood. He walked me through it, and he gave us some ideas of what we could do. And it really did start with a conversation with them. The new incoming Commissioner of Insurance of California was concerned about the affordability of insurance, and he struck up some conversations with the legislature, and they decided to begin. They realized they could do some. They could get buy-in in the two counties that have large demographics, L.A. and San Francisco, and they started with those. And then they slowly did the circuit, and now all of the counties in California have jumped on board. And so I mentioned it to our mayor, and she was intrigued by the idea, but I let her know that the commission might be looking at that in greater detail. And so there is going to be some meetings that we're going to schedule so we can have some conversation around these issues, but I just did want to give you a little bit of an update on that. And that's all I have.
Okay. Any other announcements? Fran?
I probably should have mentioned this when we were looking at the agenda, but, and I don't know whether it comes under old business or new, I guess new, that I just would like to request that we have opportunity for the subcommittees to report during our meeting, because, for example, Lisa and I met and took a good look at the Section 4 of the response to the survey about recommendations from the IDOT report, and the community engagement recommendations was particularly interesting to us. And we have some ideas and would like to share them with the commission.
Of course.
I did get a nice opportunity also to use my Human Relations Commission card this weekend. At my college reunion, there was a human rights lecture, the Kirshner Human Rights Annual Lecture, and the person who spoke at that lecture this year was Gordon Quinn. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's one of the founders of Cartemquin Films. They're a documentary company. They made Hoop Dreams. They made The Interrupters. They are a very socially conscious group. They believe in democracy through documentaries and making diverse voices heard. And Mr. Quinn, whom I met, gave my card to, and I talked to, it was a classmate of Bernie Sanders, and has some interesting film of him that actually brought a lot of attention to Cartemquin recently, because they're making a film about the 1963 Chicago school boycott. And that was the occasion of Bernie's arrest that is on film, and you may have seen it in in one of his ads or on CNN. But at any rate, this was an interesting class. It was the class before mine, unfortunately. So I didn't know these people, but I told him about our work down here and our interest and our desire to do more in this discussion of racial bias in traffic stops and other things. And he was extremely interested. And I was thinking in terms of perhaps a documentary series that we could show, and possibly even he might come down. It's very important. I mean, the purpose of their films is to engage the emotions to promote social change, and I think that would be a nice part of our efforts. in that department. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Any other announcements? Alex?
I apologize, Fran. I didn't include the report out only because some of the other groups haven't had a chance to meet, but I will make sure that they are on the next agenda. Part of it is I was waiting for Catalina to come on board, and then we're going to have a little bit of a reshuffle with Kevin's departure, but we'll make sure that that is on the next agenda. The other thing that relates to that is I did mention in the announcement on the traffic stop data, one of the key recommendations is that the city hire a statistician, and we are heavily in the middle of that search, and we're hoping we might have somebody identified by August. And so when that person comes on board, we'll be able to begin to look at the statistical analysis pieces. And depending on what their skill set is, we might be able to tap them, Peter, for the a disparity study for the city. We'll see how that goes forward. So.
Alrighty. Thank you all. This meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, sir.